Okay, so tonight we have Ed Pearson talking to us. Go ahead, Ed.
Good evening. So before I get started, I'd be curious to kind of get a sense of, are most of you all developers, DBAs, BA, analysts? What's kind of the group?
So I'm a database administrator or a traditional infrastructure person.
Don't everybody talk at once. It'll be a long night.
So it's a little complicated for me. I'm a DBA turned dev DBA turned data engineer, and I kind of switch hats a lot during the course of a day every day still. So all of the above, whatever's needed.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Chad says he's a BI developer.
Most recently, I have been a product manager on a BI team for large databases.
Okay, well that's good to know. I think that was everybody except for Mike, right? So let me share my screen here. You'll have to Lee, you'll have to let me share my screen. It says.
Yep, one moment. I always forget to turn that on. There you go.
Okay. It's okay. I keep dragging things to the wrong screen anyways. Okay. Cool. That's nice that Zoom tells you which screen you're sharing. So I'm talking about Power BI automation using Azure services. So a little bit of background on me. I'm a senior data engineer. I just started a new startup called OptiLogic. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I guess I should ask.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, cool. So I work at a new startup, OptiLogic. We're in the Python machine learning data space. So prior to that, for the previous 2.5 years, I was at Ryder for supply chain. You'll probably see some Ryder stuff because I've been doing this presentation since I was at Ryder. I've been in IT and data for about 20 years, and primarily in SQL for about 15, and Azure for the last 7. So kind of the crux of this talk is, everything we do with data, people want more data. They want it faster. They want it more accurate so that they can be data driven, right? It's a really buzzy topic. It's why we're data professionals at this point. And so what can we do to make sure that we get actionable data into where it needs to go, and our users can use it and they can make decisions based on it, right? So that's kind of where what the goal of this is. And so to get to that goal is kind of, a couple of Azure services and Microsoft services. So we're going to start with kind of Power BI. Most people know what that is. It's a reporting and analytics service from Microsoft. It's got a desktop app, and then there's a client or a cloud service that goes along with it. So at Ryder, we were a Power BI premium user. And so one of the issues with Power BI was that it was easy to create reports, right? And it's easy to kind of see your data and throw some visuals out there, but getting it refreshed is a problem. So all of our data went into using the import model. It was all going into Power BI service, and then it would show up on the reports. The out of the box capability for Power BI, if you get standard, if you don't pay for a license, you get 8 daily refreshes. Now you can do those 8 refreshes anytime you want to, but it's a hard limit. Most people kind of schedule them maybe hourly from 9 to 5. For premium, or now premium per user, you get 48 scheduled refreshes per day. So you can only schedule them at the top of the hour and half hour, and there's no exceptions to that, right? So that means if you have an issue, if you need something to go at 5 minutes after the hour, well, you can't use the scheduled refresh. And that's kind of the default behavior out of the box. So Power BI has a REST API, and it gives you the ability to do on-demand refreshes. You can do on-demand refreshes for standard. Still, that 8 refreshes a day is a hard cap, but you can do them through the API. If you have premium or premium per user on your workspace, you can do unlimited on-demand refreshes. And so that gives you the ability to kind of rethink, okay, how do I want to do this based on an event, based on something happening, based on, let's say you're keeping up with warehouse workers and you want to wait until after they clock in or out. And most people clock in or out at the, at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour, right? So you want to wait a couple of minutes till they've clocked out. You could then schedule that somewhere else and use the API to do those refreshes. And so it gives you a lot more flexibility to think about when you're going to do your refreshes and how you're going to interact with your data and how you're going to give your reports to your end users. So to kind of take advantage of this API, I wanted to use two services to support that kind of Power BI API use case. So we've got Logic Apps and Azure Data Factory. They're both, all three of these are PaaS services. So platform as a service, you're paying based on, what you're, pricing, you're paying somewhat based on how much service you're using. You're not having to do a lot of maintenance. You're not having to do you're not responsible for managing servers, those kinds of things. Those are kind of the advantages of PaaS. So what our original use case for this, our very first time doing this, was we wanted to be able to have a customer send us data and be able to bring that data in and have it show up in our Power BI dashboard in a reasonable amount of time. So let's say they were sending it every 5 minutes. We wanted to be able to go through our ETL and update Power BI in, say, 5 more minutes. So every time they sent it, there was just a 5-minute lag till they could see it on the warehouse floor, let's say. So they were actually doing this via FTP, but for the purposes of the demo, it's a lot easier to use email to show this. But you can do, the important part here is that it can be event driven. And that's kind of, to me, the key is that now you're no longer tied to that kind of hard schedule, that you can do your refreshes based on some other activity. In this case, an email being sent. So the first service, and one of the things that I want to kind of point out is you're generally going to develop these backwards to the workflow. So what you're going to do is you're going to get an email file. You're going to, bring that email in via that Logic app. Then you're going to do your ETL and ADF. Then you're going to request the Power BI refresh happen. And so you're going to that's going to be the logical workflow. The way you're probably going to develop this is actually backwards to this. So you're probably going to have a Power BI developer who's, you've got an existing data source. They're going to create a report and say, here's my report. Here's what I want it to do. And then now I'd like to get new data for it. So, you're going to have a data engineer set up, a way to get that data in, or maybe they're doing that. And then you're going to come back here and say, okay, now I want to automate this based on this email. So even though this is going to be the flow of it when it actually runs, you're probably going to develop it backwards. So I'm actually going to show it to you in the order in which you'd kind of develop it, but it's going to be a little different than like you're seeing the direction on here. So questions up to this point?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, cool. Gives me a chance to drink, so it's just an excuse. Okay. So the first kind of service outside of Power BI is Azure Data Factory. It's a data integration and orchestration engine in the cloud for data movement. I kind of want to emphasize the orchestration part. So it's not SSIS in the cloud. It was kind of initially sold that way. It's not really that out of the box. So it's drag and drop, it's code free or low code. You can interact with both cloud and on-prem. It has a variety of data connectors. You're only paying for the runtime. It does have the ability to, I didn't put this on the bullet, it does have the ability to connect to SSIS, so you can do what's called a SSIS integration runtime. So if you have existing SSIS, but you want to automate it through Azure Data Factory, you can do that. And it does have now what's called data flows. They're kind of beyond the scope of this talk, but they're where you're going to do that transformation. So they're two Spark-based engines, either using Power Query or more traditional like Python, Scala type low code, but Spark enabled transactions. So again, beyond the scope of this, but I really want to emphasize that's the kind of you're using ADF to orchestrate moving data from one place to the other and automating that. So a real high level of ADF, and then we'll jump into a demo. You're going to create a pipeline. The pipeline is going to be your core element for anything you do in Data Factory. And most every pipeline will have a copy data task. That's your data movement from here to there. So you can see in my example, I'm copying my file and then I'm doing my Power BI refresh. So you can do some kind of simple mapping, but you can't do transformations. So that's kind of the key part there. So let's see if I can figure out how to get this on the right screen here real fast. If I can figure out how to, where I'm at. Okay. So I'm gonna come in here. We're gonna start from all the way out, even though So as I said, Data Factory is completely cloud native. You're doing everything in the browser. It has a UI in the browser. It also is the exact same or nearly the same UI if you're using Synapse. So if you're a Synapse customer and you're using Synapse Data Studio, you're using Data Factory under the covers, of course. Okay. And I'm assuming I'm still sharing the right screen because it doesn't tell me which screen I'm sharing.
You are,
Yep.
yes. We can
Okay.
see the Azure Data Factory.
Okay, cool. So we're going to come in here and we're going to create a pipeline. As I said, now there's a couple of new things. They've renamed this Power Query. Data flow is slightly different. They've got some templates in here and they have this copy data tool that's kind of a nice little kind of wizard that walks you through it. But most of the time, I'm just creating a blank pipeline. This is not Git enabled, so that's why you'll see this little publish all button all the time. You know, Git's kind of out of scope, but you can use Git to source control your Data Factory. So I'm just going to copy. I probably should back up here and say, so what I did was I got some demo data and that I created a really super simple Power BI report on. And all it is how many orders do I have each day? It's some dummy data that I found on the internet of sales data. This is what it looks like. It's just, here's, and tell me if I need to zoom in, I can do that. Just, really simple ecom order data. So all I'm doing in my Power BI, because I'm more of a data engineer than a Power BI person, all I'm doing is basically just summing the amount of orders I'm getting every day. So this is I'm just taking this CSV and I'm writing it into SQL. I've got a super simple, you can see there's the exact same version here in SQL, right? And so I've got, there's the same data that I'm showing in Power BI. Nothing complicated here. So I come out here and I create a pipeline. I'm going to copy it from something to something. So the source, pretty straightforward. Source sync is your target. And I've already created two kind of sample data sets, but we'll go through it just so it's quick and easy. So like I said, there's a variety of connectors already in here. You can create other ones if you need to, like if you need to create, get to a REST API, you can. But out of the box, those are the ones that are here. So I'm copying my email files over to Blob just to bring them in. So I've got, a couple of different, I can import Excel directly. I can get JSON. In this case, I'm going to do a CSV. So and I've already created a connection to my blob. So now in here, I'm going to create, you can pick some settings, what's your delimiter. If you've got a different delimiter, if you have a special row delimiter, you can put it in here. If you need an escape character, if you have a different quote character, and probably the most important one is way down here at the bottom is first row as header. Also, for my purposes, you can parameterize a lot of this so that you can reuse the same connection over and over again. So I'm going to just do that real fast. You don't have to, you can come in here and you could actually go and browse to my folder and you'll see that there's already a folder here. But I'm going to do it in the pipeline just to make this a little nicer. Now I'm not going to, one of the nice things about Data Factory is that it's at scale, because it's cloud native. So if I want to do an entire folder, if I had 1,000 CSV files, it's super fast to do all 1,000. I don't have to put anything in here. I don't have to loop through it like I would in SSIS. It'll just basically put all those 1,000 files together and start sticking them into SQL. So that's one of the really nice things about it being, cloud native. So in this case, I'm just going to leave this folder blank. So I'm going to come back here. You all saw that I have a processed folder. So I usually do incoming and process. So the ones I've already done are in the process folder, but just for the purposes of this demo, we can reprocess it and you'll see it. So I've got file path in dataset, prefix, wildcard file path. I'm just going to put star.csv. Again, kind of kind of simple like you would do in Windows. And then I'm going to copy that over to SQL. So again, we're going to go through, we're going to create a new data set. You can type in SQL. You get a couple of different options in here. Normally I'm pickier about my naming, but for this purpose, I'm not going to be picky. Again, I can create parameters for this. So I can have schema name and table name. The nice thing about the parameters are that then the parameters show up here in your pipeline. So it's a good way to kind of be self-documenting of, hey, what am I doing in this as you check through. So if I go back here, the name of the table. Okay. So the only thing is that if we look at the demo data, it has invoice number, and I, in my infinite wisdom, put invoice number, spelled it out in my table create statement. And since it's already in my Power BI report, I really don't want to go and change it. So I do have to come in here and do some mapping. If they were exactly the same column headers as my table column headers, then I could just run this and it wouldn't cause me any problems. So I come in here, I import schemas, so I can even go through and I can preview the source. I can look at, there's the exact same data we saw earlier. And down here, it says that, hey, invoice number doesn't match anything. So I just changed that. And then I'm good to run this. So when it's not get enabled, publish all is basically save all. The important part about the publish is that you can't connect anything that's not published. So if I run this again, if I click debug and I run it, it will actually import all the records that I've already imported once before. So, and you'll see, because it's all in Azure, it's pretty quick. So now if we go back and we looked at this right here, 62, and now it's going to be exactly double. If I go back to Power BI and I run my refresh manually, you'll see that, I apparently did it the sum of quantity, but yeah, it got bigger. The quantity got bigger. Okay, so now I want to be able to do this kind of automated, and I want to be able to update the Power BI. So that's kind of my next step. So questions on Data Factory and that part of it?
I didn't see any questions.
Okay. Okay. So let me go back here. So we'll skip, we'll come back to Logic Apps now. So we're kind of using Logic Apps as the glue between the different services. It's a low-code serverless offering that's a PaaS service, part of Azure App Services, that's an if this, then that activity. So it allows you to create workflows based on events. It's code-free or low-code. I caution everybody when I always say code-free, because if you want to do advanced stuff, you end up touching a little bit of code. But for the most part, it's a GUI, just like ADF. You can drag and drop, and and kind of get most of where you need to go without writing any code. It's the same as Power Automate. So if you don't have an Azure subscription, but you have an Office subscription, you can use almost this entire same functionality. There's a few enterprisey features to Logic Apps that Power Automate doesn't have, but underneath the covers, they're the exact same service, and you can actually export from Power Automate to Logic Apps. So if somebody wants to, automate this for their own email, and then they say, hey, I want to now have this be core to our solution, and somebody else take it over, then they can export that, and you can use it in Logic Apps. Every Logic App must have at least one trigger. That trigger can be a schedule. So if you say, I want this to run every 5 minutes, it'll run every 5 minutes. The key here is, though, that it only fires when the trigger is true, and you only pay for when it's true. So if you say, I want it to run every 5 minutes, you're going to pay every 5 minutes, regardless of whether something happened. And for me, this is kind of the big paradigm shift from kind of the way we used to work. I feel like in SSIS, and we were kind of schedule driven. Every hour something happened, whether we got new data or not. Every night we ran something, whether something new had occurred or not. This kind of shifts us into being event driven, to where we can say, okay, I got a new email, or a file just got dropped, and it was in the middle of the night, and so now I want to run this, and I'm only paying for resources when it actually runs, that kind of thing. So at the time, this was 200 connections. I'm sure it keeps going up, and they keep adding new things that you can do in each connection. So this is just a simple one. When you get an order, you want to do a couple of different things with it. When an HTTP request is received, basically Logic Apps is giving you the ability to create a REST API without you having to ever know any code, which is super nice. And that's what we'll do here. So I'm going to end up creating two Logic Apps, one for our email checking, and then one we're going to use to automate the Power BI part. So just come in or you can come here, create a resource, type Logic Apps. Apparently not with a S. You want to pick consumption model. The standard model is a little bit more advanced. So it's more like if you were running a service that runs all the time, but the default, kind of the classic Logic App, is consumption model. So that's consumption based. You're only paying when something happens. We should put this in East US too, just because that's where my data is. Doesn't really matter, but so if you go into Power Automate, the screen that's kind of this home screen for the Logic App Designer, it looks basically the same. The only difference here is kind of the common triggers. You're not going to see Service Bus in Power Automate, but you'll see most of the other ones. So in this case, I'm just going to do a new email. I've already signed myself in. I can set some parameters. I can use inbox, or if I have other mailboxes. So if you have mail sorting where you have it sort into this folder based on a rule, then you can use that. You can set how often you check for items. So again, you're only paying for when it actually happens, but you can set how frequently it checks. If you know you're only going to get it for once a day, have it only check once a day. If if you think legitimately it may be every 3 minutes, then set it. And then you can do some other kind of parameters based on your mail inbox. You know, if you only want to look if it comes to a certain email address, or it comes from a certain email address. In my case, I'm just going to do with attachments, include attachments, and I'm going to do a subject filter. So I want to get ones that have attachments. I want to make sure I get the attachment, and then I've just made the subject line UK order. I'm just going to change to 60 minutes. Okay. At this point, you'll remember we created the well-named pipeline 2 over here. And, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I want to copy the file I get in my email into Blob so that I can pick it up in Data Factory. So I'm going to create it. As I said, I like to make this incoming. You can't pick in the picker a folder that doesn't exist, but you can hard type it, and I'll show you that here in a second. And then you'll get all the things that come through from your previous connections available. So in this case, I want to do the attachment name. Now you'll notice that it's smart enough to know that I could potentially get more than one attachment, and so it made a for each for me. I didn't even have to do that, which is super nice of it. And then I just want to do the attachment contents. Underneath all this is some JSON. So if you, like I said, if you need to do something more advanced, then that's where you go. In this case, I'm going to tell it I want to put this in incoming, because it's not going to let me do it by default. And then I want to run Azure Data Factory pipeline once it does it. So all I'm doing is I'm picking up an email and I'm running Data Factory. See, there's my nicely named pipelines. One thing to be aware of is that up here, I changed this to be incoming now, but when we were in here, because we were kind of demoing it, we use process. So I'll need to change that before the next one runs and publish this. It can only run the published version. So I've created my blob, I've created a pipeline run, and then I am just, all I'm doing is sending myself an email with the, you know, attachment for this. Nothing real fancy there. Now, if I'm impatient and I don't want this to wait the 60 seconds, 60 minutes, I can run this manually by running this trigger. You'll see that and my email wasn't there, but I can see that it's just now gotten here. I can run it again manually. And you can actually go in here if you needed to debug it and see it. It created the file over here. So it picked up that December 3rd data. And then if I go over here to monitor, we can see that it just ran with that December 3rd data. And if we want to make sure that actually is December 3rd, yeah, it'll just say one file, 2200 results. And now if we go back here to Power BI, I'm kind of skipping around. We can refresh this again. And now you'll see that I've got data for the 3rd. So the last step in this process is we want to be able to do this Power BI refresh without me actually having to do that. So one of the things that one of the connectors that Logic Apps has out of the box is Power BI. So we're gonna not have a, you know, kind of wait for something to happen, but Logic Apps, so it's not like going to send off to Data Factory and say, hey, tell me when you're done. You'll actually have a separate Logic App that actually does just the Power BI refresh. And so when this pipeline is done, it'll run your Power BI refresh. So we're going to come in here, create another Logic App, same exact process. Consumption. It doesn't really take it very long to create a Logic App. It's not real involved. So you'll notice that one of these is when an HTTP request is received. Like I said, that is basically your, it'll create a REST API for you without doing anything. So I want to create a, I have it in here. So if I come back here. So I'm going to pass it along this information data set ID and the workspace ID. And you'll see in here, that's exactly the JSON data that I'm passing it through. So I do have to write a little bit of JSON just to tell it what to expect in this body. And of course, I forgot where I'd put that. So I'm going to copy from my example here. Wish I could get this to.
It's so while Ed's retrieving that, is there any questions about anything he showed so far, or anything that's happening with the Azure work at all?
Well, either it's really boring or I'm doing a great job. So based on the amount of questions.
Great job. Let's go with great job.
And this just, you know, nothing real complicated here.
And I know, just to talk while you're typing, I know we got some Logic Apps floating around at my place of employment, and I'm sure there's some opportunities to have them basically go, well, since I'm done, let's trigger something in Power BI. So that's super interesting right there.
Let's see if I got the correct amount of curly brackets. In the, just to be super quick about this, the normally I would say the workspace ID. So you're going to use if you come out to Power BI, you'll have a workspace ID and you'll have a data set ID. In my case, for my example, I'm just using the quote unquote my workspace, the one that everybody gets when they log on to Power BI. So there's not actually a workspace ID. So I'm just gonna, for the demo purposes, just pass through the data set ID. So if you come out here and you go back to this, if you go to the settings of your data set, any data set that you have ownership for, you'll get up here, you'll see this is the data set ID. And you'll notice in this case, basically me is the workspace ID. Normally you would have, if you were, in an enterprise, you would, or Power BI service that you would publish besides yourself, you would have a workspace ID. So there is a Power BI connector. The Power BI, the REST API that Power BI has about 200 things that you can do in it. And the first time I did this for myself, I actually had to create the API connection and go through a long process. There's some really good blogs and tutorials out there on using it. But since then, they've added to where Power Automate and Logic Apps have a Power BI, have these built-in connectors to do these 4 things. And the first time I did the demo, after they added it, they only had 2 of these, and they've added 2 more since then. So, and they keep adding new things. You'll notice that all of these are preview. So in this case, I'm going to refresh the data set. I'm going to sign in again because I didn't do that. As I said, I'm using the My Workspace. I can pick this because it's the only one there. But what I want to do is I want to make this a custom value, and I want to do this based on a dynamic content. So if I go in here, apparently I made a typo. Let's see if it makes that better. It should give me the option to well, for now, just I'll have to fix this real fast, but and it won't let you, by the way, leave this blank. You have to put something in there. But for now, I'll just put in the one report I've got so we can at least see it working. And then I'll fix that here in a second. So now at the end, when I save this, you'll notice that I got a REST API URL. I didn't have to do anything for that. Copy that. I come over here to back to ADF, and now I'm going to make a web activity. And then here's where I'm going to paste in my URL. It's going to be a post. I'm going to not pass it anything because I didn't do that. And then you do have to put in the logic app is going to expect JSON content. So you have to tell it that's what you're sending. So now I should be able to go through, do the same exact process, send myself another email, and it should refresh without me having to do anything. And we can see. We'll come in here, send ourselves another email. I didn't change that back to do this every 1 minute. So just in the interest of not having to wait for it, we'll run it manually. So you'll notice right here that the other times I did it in here, it says on demand. This time it didn't put it on demand. If it was scheduled, it would say scheduled right here. So the fact that it did it via the API, it doesn't say on demand. So that's a good sign. So now come back here and you'll notice now I've got more days. So questions, things on any of these services that you'd like to go more in depth on?
Don't have any questions right now yet, still. So you're doing a great job.
Well, I mean, I'm glad to answer any kind of, even if it's not covered by the demo, if there's something, I'm not going to tell you that I'm a Power BI expert. I know a lot about the Power BI service, but not about actually creating Power BI reports. But if there's anything Data Factory or Logic Apps that I can answer, I'd be glad to.
Well, if no other questions, I guess I have a thought I want to run by you. I know a common way to get information from third parties or people outside is via email. They email you in an Excel sheet, and that's what your simulation here does. How well does this handle mistakes they make? Because when you're getting something from a third party, it could be an analyst putting it together and doing the manipulations in Excel, and you might get something slightly off. How well does this handle that? And is there things we can do to protect ourselves from that?
Well, so I would say, going back to kind of my comment about if you're using Azure Data Factory, it's an orchestration engine. It's not great about error handling, right? It can, because there's not a lot of logic built in there. So that's where you're going to either use something like data flows. One thing I saw that actually was a blog post I saw this morning that's a really good idea is if you've got somebody who's really good with Power Query and they're doing a lot of that cleanup in Power Query to get it into Power BI, you could actually take that Power Query that cleans up your Excel and put it into Data Factory and have that run as part of your process, right? So you can do, if it fails, you can come down here just like you could and think about, you've got your kind of precedence constraints, you've got success, failure, completion, skip. If it fails, you can send yourself an email. You can have it go through another loop. You can have it send it to your analyst and say, hey, this file didn't work. Will you go through and clean it up or something like that? Or you can do some kind of automated process. If you've got, hey, I know every time they send it, the leading zeros get dropped. That's not something that works out of the box with Data Factory, but you can use a stored procedure, you can use data flows. There's other ways around that, but yeah, that's kind of those paths that you would go down.
Gotcha. Thank you.
In this case, I'm just using Logic Apps to just copy it from one place to another because Data Factory doesn't have the ability to do kind of all this event-driven stuff. And so the Logic Apps really not doing any kind of error handling. Kind of all that would be in Data Factory. Other questions related to that?
Doesn't look like there are additional questions at this time.
Well, I really appreciate you all having me. I appreciate your time. I hope if there's anything that you think about later on, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'm ECP Data. I'll put that back up here. And be glad to help or point you in a direction if I can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ed, for the presentation and the time at work that it took to put it all together and be here with us tonight. So definitely appreciate it.